So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of sustainability of differentiation advantage and look at the supply and demand side of differentiation. So in terms of generating a sustainable competitive advantage, differentiation is generally considered preferable to a cost leadership strategy. And you think about why that might be. Cost leadership can generally be more vulnerable to unpredictable forces. Think about, for example, a new developing country may start becoming a low-cost producer and threaten your cost leadership or your cost advantage. A lot of firms that have cost leadership operate in industries with very low margins. Think about like manufacturing, food retailing, etc. And if there's any sort of exchange rate or commodities price surges or declines, these are firms that can be threatened by that. Okay, they're much more sensitive to it than those firms that focus on differentiation and have a greater margin. And there could be some sort of a disruptive technology that comes along, and those new firms would have a greater cost advantage. Or they could completely render obsolete whatever product or process you are providing, which is really bad because there's high exit barriers for firms that have cost leadership. Again, remember the high fixed costs, the leases, the infrastructure, and the huge capital requirements. So they're particularly vulnerable. Now, most good companies, as I mentioned, they kind of do that stretch thing. They are kind of stretching between differentiation through quality and branding and innovation, but then also trying to compete on a cost basis as well. So you're trying to kind of stretch. Primarily it's differentiation, but they also want to provide low cost too. Okay. So very few compete exclusively on one or the other. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. A good firm will combine them both in some way. Now if we look at the demand side of differentiation, you can try to understand what the product or the customer will define as valuable enough to be differentiated. Looking at the product, does it satisfy some special need that's not already being satisfied? And you could ask yourself, what are the key attributes of a product that would be designed to satisfy that special need? Okay. Now the customer, you could also look at too. Like you could ask yourself, what motivates the customer? If you want to know what motivated the customer to buy your product potentially, you could look at demographic, sociological, psychological differences between different segments of society and segments within an industry and try to understand how those demographic, sociological, and psychological attributes can impact customer behavior. Okay, so understanding customer motivation. You can also look at the criteria that customers choose when they're buying things. You could look at what price premiums do certain attributes command. So, will these features get a customer to buy something or not? And what price level would they be willing to pay? And are there any special or relatable patterns of customer preferences when it comes to product attributes? So there's certain things that generally speaking, customers value X, Y, and Z features in a product or service. So you kind of take those things together, you look at the features of the product and the customer, and you kind of have some sort of a strategy to go with that. So you could look at selecting a product positioning with regard to product attributes. You could select a unique segment or target customer group. You could look at the compatibility between the customer and the product, and you can evaluate the costs and benefits of differentiation. Alternatively, you could look at the supply side. Differentiation. So you can examine the activities that the firm is performing and the resources to which it has access. So what are the firm and its resources? You could look at the drivers of uniqueness. So what are the product features and performance? Are there any complementary services that go along with it? What about the intensity of marketing spending? Is there any special technology embodied in the design and manufacture? What about the quality of purchasing inputs or purchased inputs? Are there any procedures that influence the conduct of each activity? What about employee skill levels, location, degree of vertical integration, etc.? So basically what you're looking on the demand side, you're trying to understand the customer And on the supply side, you're looking within the firm and comparing kind of the internal attributes of the firm to that of, that of your competitors. Okay. So you want to be different inside with regards to the competitor, but then looking at outside the market, you also want to understand how you can be different in the eyes of the customer. So that's kind of like how we derive key success factors, doesn't it? It's a very similar process. So what we're going to talk about in the next video is kind of certain attributes that you can use to combine demand side and supply side. We'll look at product integrity, signaling and reputation, brands, and we'll look at the cost of differentiation. Looking forward to seeing you then.